Alright, this is Daniel 3 in the MacArthur Study Bible and the Endearing Word Commentary. A familiar chapter. Alright, well, a little refresher of 2. Basically, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and he wants his wise men, magicians, sorcerers, astrologers to give him the dream and interpretation, but they're not able to do it. Nebuchadnezzar threatens to kill all the wise men, and then Daniel and the friends pray to God. God gives Daniel the answer, the dream and the interpretation, and then he goes to Nebuchadnezzar and explains all of it. Yeah, of the image and the different types of metals in the image representing the different kingdoms, and all of them will fall basically, and Christ's kingdom is the only one that lasts. The stone not cut with human hands, shattering all those other kingdoms ultimately. And then Nebuchadnezzar praises Daniel, and of course says that God is the God of gods, and Daniel is promoted and has given many gifts. Yep. And also, Daniel asks the king to have the 3 friends, be set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. All right. And now the story continues into chapter 3. Yep. Very familiar. Yep. The fiery furnace. All right. And I'll start with the first section. Yeah, the image of gold. That's the first 7 verses, and then I'll go through the MacArthur and the Endearing Word notes, hopefully pretty quickly as possible, because there's a lot of Endearing Word notes on this one. Alright, so 1 through 7. So Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the satraps, the administrators, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all the officials, basically the politicians of all the provinces in the Babylonian Empire gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up, and then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people of the nations and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery and symphony, with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship the image shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." And so at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, and all the people, nations, languages, fell down and worshipped the gold image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay. And I'll start with the MacArthur notes, and then I'll get through the Endearing Word notes for the first 7 verses here. Okay, so the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar sets up here. So the statue which the king arrogantly made, yes, it represented himself in this statue as an expression of his greatness and his glory. And it reflected the dream where he was the head of gold in the dream. Yeah, but that wasn't meant to, for him to do this. No. It was not necessarily made of solid gold, but more likely it would have been overlaid with gold. Okay. Like many objects found in the ruins of Babylon, the word image usually means a human form. So pretty much a human statue, if you probably really a statue of himself, basically. The height figure basically was about 90 feet, yeah, or 60 cubits, which is about 18 inches. And then the width was 6 cubits, so 9 feet. It would have been comparable in height to date palms found in that area. And the self-deifying statue of the king need not to have been grotesquely thin in proportion to the height, since a massive base could have contributed to the height. So this established the worship of Nebuchadnezzar and the nation under his power, in addition to other gods, and the other false Babylonian pagan gods. Yeah, not the worship of the one true God only. Yeah, so. Alright, and then basically the different people who come, to come down, and all the different politicians coming to bow down. Leaders attending the summit conference for Nebuchadnezzar's display are the satraps, leaders over regions, administrators, or military chiefs, governors, civil administrators, counselors, lawyers, treasurers, judges, government, government, abriters, arbiters or whatever, magistrates, judges, in our sense today, officials, or just other leaders, basically. Yep. So coming to bow down whenever they hear the music from the lyre, the harp, or or a psaltery or whatever. So a lyre is basically like a harp, possibly a square or rectangle with strings to pluck, with a plectrum or a pick. I guess kind of like a square or rectangular shaped harp, if you will. Yeah, and it would yield high tones whenever you would, pick it. Use the pick or whatever. Then a psaltery basically is an instrument plucked with the fingers rather than with the pick, yielding low tones. I guess maybe like using fingers. I guess somewhat like a guitar, maybe at the time. Or maybe or maybe a bass guitar, sort of, even though it would not be electric, but anyway. So. And of course, you go and bow down, and if you don't, you'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. Or kiln, that's another word for it. Some ancient kilns were found to have been shaped like a vertical tunnel, basically only open at the top, with the dome supported by columns, and charcoal normally served as fuel. Okay. All right. Well, that's the MacArthur notes. Now I'll get to the endearing word notes. So the image is made and set up. So, of course, made the image of gold again. Now, there's considerable debate regarding when this happened. Some think it was a short time after the events of Daniel 2, but others think it happened many years later. And there is a discernible link between Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 and the image that he made here in chapter 3. And it seems that Nebuchadnezzar deliberately made an entire statue of gold to say that the day of his reign and authority would never end, in contradiction to God's declared plan in chapter 2. Image of gold, and this image was more likely a stabilized obelisk or whatever, rather than a normal statue. Yeah, of course, 90 feet or 30 meters high, and then 9 feet or 3 meters wide. Being so large, it's safe to say it was not made of solid gold, but of course overlaid with gold, and it was a common method of construction in the ancient world. Alright, and then all of Babylonia's dignitaries gathered at the dedication of the image. So, and then here's another info about satraps. It's a satrap is a Persian loan word that means protector of the realm. It basically just refers to a specific category of public officials. All the officials of the provinces came to the dedication of the image. So the demand that all come to the dedication ceremony, it means that Nebuchadnezzar meant to use this worship of the image as a test to his allegiance, as a test of their allegiance to him. Yeah. The command to worship the image. You got the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and all that. Now, some of these musical instruments are difficult to define precisely, but the idea is still clear. This was an impressive orchestra. Probably used maybe to manipulate you, or maybe to get you in the mood to actually just bow down. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised. Alright, now the use of the Aramaic words for lyre and psaltery and symphony, have led to some critics to say that the book of Daniel was written hundreds of years after the time of Daniel. And they say this because these particular words are Aramaic words borrowed from the Greek words, and supposedly Daniel did not have these words at his disposal in the 6th century BC, and they supposedly did not come into the Hebrew vocabulary until the 3rd century BC. But nevertheless, ancient records tell us there were Greeks in the region of Assyria, Babylon, and Persia as far back as the 8th century BC. And archaeology also proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Greek mercenaries fought and made military settlements in and around Judea before the time of Daniel. So maybe you did have such words then. So I guess, once again, trying to make that argument of later date, I guess, still doesn't work. Alright, back to more endearing word notes. If you don't fall down in worship, of course, thrown into the fiery furnace again. Now, the command was backed up by a powerful threat. The command to bow down was backed up by a powerful threat. So, Nebuchadnezzar regarded the refusal to worship the image as treason, not only as a religious offense. You're a traitor to the Babylonian Empire, and so you must be punished. In this, Nebuchadnezzar was just like many politicians who often seem willing to use religion to strengthen their grip on political power. Politicians are happy to blend together spiritual allegiance and national allegiance. An example of this was displayed whenever this guy, Herr Baldur von Schirach, it's hard to say that, I don't speak German, but he was the head of the youth program for Nazi Germany. He said, if we act as true Germans, we act according to the laws of God. Whoever serves Adolf Hitler, the Fuhrer, serves Germany, and whoever serves Germany serves God. No, you don't serve God when you're murdering people. But unfortunately God gets used, sadly, to justify evil. The Nazis did this. And even communists can do it too. Even though, of course, you can only worship the state. Yep, and this is definitely the case here. And it's happened throughout human history. And the real Christians and believers who do not bend the knee to government get persecuted. Yep, yep, yeah. And of course, in this case, get thrown into a furnace here. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was not a man who allowed lawbreakers to go unpunished. In the ancient cuneiform writing, however you say that, Nebuchadnezzar was described as so devoted to justice that he did not rest night or day. The document also tells of a criminal guilty of a second offense who was decapitated, and afterwards a stone image of his head was displayed as a warning. Yikes. And then the crowd bows down, of course, and doesn't sing the bunny song. Yep. Yep. So Nebuchadnezzar's grand idolatry was accompanied by music, elaborate and well-produced music, and this reminds us of the great inherent power in music, both for good and also for evil. Yeah, that's something to be aware of. I know people may have disagreements about styles, especially maybe rock and roll and rap. Yeah, but again, you just got to be careful with how music is used, and even worship music today can be used to manipulate, and probably maybe this music was used as well, yeah, to get them in the mood in order to do this or to shut off the critical thinking. So that's just something to be aware of when it comes to music. Yeah. Yeah, right. But anyway, all right. And then here's a note here. Yeah, according to Baldwin, this literally, they fell down and worshipped the image. Yeah, it literally reads, as soon as they were hearing, they were falling down. There was total and immediate obedience to Nebuchadnezzar's command. Yeah, once the music was playing, they were bowing down. Yep. All right. But at least not everybody did. So now you get to the second section here. You get to 8 through 18. Daniel's friends disobey the king. So therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Now there are certain Jews that you set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. And then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, he gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar spoke to them and said, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Oh boy. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the image which you have set up. Wow. Okay. MacArthur notes first. It's not as many here. Alright. So, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Now, these Chaldeans here, they were probably likely the priests of Bel Merodach, yeah, who was, of course, one of the Babylonian false gods. Yeah, and these guys were probably envious of these young Jews and sought their death. Yep. And then they go and tell Nebuchadnezzar, that, they did not worship the gods that you set up. So enemies of God's servants witnessed such a clear-cut testimony that they were in no doubt about their rejection of idolatry and their unshakable allegiance to the God of Israel. Yeah. So basically these guys these Chaldeans who are talking to Nebuchadnezzar, they mention Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, these men are not bowing down to these gods, your gods, in this image. So Daniel was not mentioned as being part of the refusal to worship, witnessed by the Chaldeans. Yeah, because, you kind of wonder, where was Daniel in all this? So, I mean, how did he get spared from this ordeal? I mean, he wouldn't have bowed down either. Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe they didn't witness Daniel. Maybe they just witnessed the other three. I don't know. Yeah, or maybe Daniel was not there at the time. Maybe he was doing something else. I don't know. But anyway, somehow he wasn't in this time. Yeah, maybe Endearing Word might say something. I don't know. So, but he definitely would have not bowed down either. Yeah, that's for sure. So, yep. And then Nebuchadnezzar calls them forward, basically, and, gives them one last opportunity to do it. Yeah, and then he arrogantly says, "Who is the God that's going to deliver you from my hands?" Sheesh. And this challenge would return to embarrass him. The true God was about to deliver, just as he was able to reveal the dream and its meaning. Nebuchadnezzar earlier called him the God of gods in chapter 2, but having let that fade from his attention, he soon would be shocked and humiliated when God would take up the challenge. Yeah, because what happened? I mean, God revealed that dream to you, dude, and you just forgot. Yep, or whatever. Yeah, or maybe since you found out eventually the kingdom's not going to last, then maybe this was just an attempt to try to make sure maybe it would last. Yeah, but no, maybe. So, yeah. So, alright. And we got, and then the three men, of course, answer, basically. We have no need to answer you in this matter. Yeah, and God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. So the three men, they meant no disrespect. They did not have any defense, nor did they need to reconsider their commitment, since they stood fast for their God as the only true and living God. Their lives were in his hands, as they indicated. Yep, and he can save us from this furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand. But even if not, we're still not going to bow down anyway. Yeah, I mean, man, what courage. I just hope we could take stands like that. Yeah. All right, endearing word, adding some more light to this. Yeah, hopefully some stuff there that I didn't talk about already. All right, so the Chaldeans, here we go. And here's what it says about those Chaldeans who went to accuse them. They obviously had political motivation against the Jews who were promoted to high office along with Daniel in the events recorded in the previous chapters. Yep. And they don't serve your gods or worship the golden image. So apparently their failure to worship the image was not discovered until these certain Chaldeans made it known. With so many thousands of government officials in attendance, it would have been easy to overlook those three. And additionally, we see from this that the three Jewish men did not lodge a formal protest. They just simply refrained from sharing in the sin of idolatry themselves. They just didn't do it. That's pretty much it. Yeah, everyone else was, but they weren't. Yeah, well, if Daniel was there, he didn't do it either. Maybe he just didn't get noticed like those three did. Maybe he wasn't with them. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe he was off somewhere else not doing it. So, I don't know. Yeah. So this is a quote from Spurgeon. Their actions were not public, but neither were they hidden. These three Hebrew men must have known that they would be discovered, and yet they obeyed God rather than men. Spurgeon, you will not be able to go through life without being discovered. A lightened candle cannot be hid. There is a feeling among some good people that it'll be wise for them to be very reticent or whatever, and hide their light under a bushel. They will intend to lay low all during wartime and come out when the palms are being distributed. They hope to travel through heaven by the back lanes and sulk into glory in disguise. Ah, me, what a degenerate set. Well, that's true. Most of us want to have it easy without the suffering and the persecution. Yeah, but Spurgeon despised such a thing. Yeah, and rightfully so. Yeah, and hopefully we would listen. Yeah. Yep. All right. And Nebuchadnezzar interviews the disobedient men. So, endearing word again says, to his credit, Nebuchadnezzar did not accept the accusation on hearsay. He made sure of it with a personal interview. And this was even a greater test for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was one thing to make a stand for God. It's a greater thing to stick to your stand whenever you're pointedly asked, is it true? Peter followed Jesus after his arrest, but he wilted and he denied Jesus whenever he was asked, is it true? Are you one of his? When you're asked, it's easy to slip. And here's another quote from Spurgeon again. If standing before the heart-searching God at this time, you cannot say, is it true, how should you act? If you cannot say that you take Christ's cross and you're willing to follow him at all hazards, then hearken to me and learn the truth. Do not make profession at all. Do not talk about baptism or the Lord's Supper, nor of joining the church, nor of being a Christian. For if you do, you will lie against your own soul. If it not be true that you renounce the world's idols, do not profess that it is so. It is unnecessary that a man should profess to be what he is not. It is a sin of retrogation, however you say that. a superfluity or whatever, fluidity of naughtiness. If you cannot be true to Christ, if your coward heart is is yeah recurrent to your Lord, and or whatever, however you say that, do not profess to be his disciple, I beseech you. He that is married to the world or flint-hearted had better return to his house, for he is of no service in this war. Wow. If you do not want to take a stand for Christ, basically, then don't call yourself a Christian. Wow. And some pretty big words again. But they're true. And Nebuchadnezzar would not tolerate losing face on such an important occasion. His pride made him declare that you shall have no other gods than me. The opposite of God saying that you shall have no other gods before me. And then here's another quote from Spurgeon. Here we go. So we can imagine the enormous pressure on, here's the endearing word part, and then I'll get to the quote. We can imagine the enormous pressure on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to compromise. Everything in front of them, the king, the furnace, the music, their compatriots, their competitors, all of it conspired to convince them to compromise. And yet God was more real to them than any of those things. And here's Spurgeon's quote. Do not judge the situation by the king's threat and by the heat of the burning fiery furnace, but by the everlasting God and the eternal life which awaits you. Let not flute, harp, or sackbut fascinate you, but hearken to the music of the glorified. Men frown at you, but you can see God smiling on you, and so you are not moved. There you go. If God is more important to you ultimately, then you're definitely not going to compromise. And Nebuchadnezzar thought of nothing of insulting all gods with this statement. Basically, whenever he said, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? He's more of a secularist or a humanist rather than a theist. The God that he really believes in when he says that is ultimately himself, not the gods of Babylon. Besides, they couldn't deliver anyway because they don't exist. And of course, this whole thing is basically Nebuchadnezzar wanting to get worshipped as God, basically. And then the three Hebrew men, of course, say that they're never going to worship the image. An endearing word says that they had no need to defend themselves. Their guilt in this matter was clear. They clearly would not bow down to the image. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. Now in this, the Jewish men showed a good understanding and appreciation of God's power, God's great power. In fact, they knew that God was able to save them from both the fiery furnace and from the hand of Nebuchadnezzar himself. But in this, the men show that they had good understanding and appreciation of submission to God. They knew God's power, but they also knew that they must do what is right, even if God did not do what they expect or hope him to do. Even if he didn't deliver them, they're still not going to bow down anyway. And then here's some more notes here, basically, kind of a modern day application. We often complain about our rights and what is fair. Often it's better to make a stand and endure difficulty, leaving our fate in the hands of God. Now they did not doubt God's ability, but neither did they presume to know God's will. Well, we don't know God's will. And in this, basically, they agreed with Job when Job said, though he slay me, yet I will still trust him. Job 13:15. And they recognized that God's plan might be different from their desires. I have my own desires and dreams, and I pray that God fulfills them. But Even if he doesn't, I can't turn my back on him. And these were men who did not love too much. There are popular self-help books that help people that hope to help people who seem to love too much. And yet many Christians are hindered because they love too much. We love too much of the world, basically. Remember that the early Christians were not thrown into lions because they worshiped Jesus. No, it's because they would not worship the emperor. If Jesus was just added along to the Roman pantheon of gods and along with the emperor, then there would have been no problem. But the fact that they only worship Jesus alone, Jesus is Lord and not Caesar, that was the problem. That's why they were persecuted. In our day, many do love Jesus and think highly of him, yet they are far from God because they also love and worship the world, sin, and self. And of course, 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And we will not bow down to your gods or serve that image. And here's some more notes again. It took great faith for them to say this. God brought them to this place of great faith by preparing them with tests in the less dramatic areas. Like in chapter 1. And these men stood firm when challenged to eat impure foods, and they saw God bless their obedience. That gave them courage to obey now when the stakes were much higher. And many fail in their obedience because they wait for something big to test their faith before they really start to obey God. Some fill their life with many small compromises, yet tell themselves that they will stand firm when it really matters. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show us that obedience to God in small things really matters. That's definitely true. Because, when it's small and easy, it's definitely much easier. I've definitely been guilty. But hopefully not anymore. Let it be known to you, O king. Of course, the statement of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is remarkable for what it does not have. It doesn't have any hint of excuse. In the time of testing, it's easy to think of a thousand excuses, basically, that seem to justify compromising. And here's some more endearing word notes. Basically, here's some possible excuses, basically, that could have been used to try to justify it. And of course, we can use these today. Here's this one. They may have said, there's nothing to gain by resisting. Wouldn't we do more good by living? We must live, but in reality, Now, it's easy to say we must live, but really in reality we must die, so why not die making a stand for God? And they might have said this, we're at a different place in Rome, do as Romans do. But yet, they knew that God has unlimited jurisdiction. We must do more than perform acts of religious obedience when we have an audience. And they could have said this, and this is definitely true today. We'll lose our jobs and our standard of living. Often when God blesses us, we make the blessing an idol and compromise God in order to keep what we have. And they may have said this too. After all, we're not being called to renounce our God. They did not have a super elastic conscience that said, we're not bowing down to the idol, but only bowing down in respect for the king and honor of the music. Now, excuses like this are common, but they prove the principle that anything can serve as an excuse when the heart is bent on compromise. And they may have also said, if giving excuses, which they didn't, but if they did, they could have said this. Everyone else is doing it. Instead, They cultivated brave personalities willing to stand alone with God. And that might be what it might take. Sometimes you may end up standing alone. Yeah. And they may have said this too. It's only for once and not for very long. 10 minutes just before the king. It's stupid to just throw away our lives just for 10 minutes. Or maybe 10 seconds. Now, these men knew that the 10 minutes could change an entire life. Yeah, 10 minutes can chart the course for your eternity. And they may have said this also. This is more than can be expected of us. God will understand just this once. Now, it's true that God does understand our struggle with sin. That's why he loves the sinner, and he makes provision at the cross for freedom from the penalty of sin and the power and presence of sin. Knowing that God understands should be a spur to obedience, not a license to sin and compromise. Not at all. All right, and here's another quote from Spurgeon again. I'm glad that the three holy children were not careful to answer, and the KJV has, we are not careful to answer thee here. Or they could have fallen upon some crooked policy or lame excuse for a compromise. What have we to do with consequences? It is ours to do the right. Leave the results with the Lord. Yep. All right. And then, of course, this. Saved in the fiery trial. Yep. So they're not bowing down. Yep. Or Rack, Shack, and Benny. They're not bowing down to the chocolate bunny and singing the bunny song. Yep. Alright, the three men are cast into the fiery furnace. Saved in the fiery trial. 19 through 25. Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed. Toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning furnace. And then these men who were bound in their coats, trousers, turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. And therefore, because the king's command was urgent, the furnace was exceedingly hot, and the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell down, bound into the midst of the burning furnace. And then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste, and he spoke, saying to his counselors, didn't we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And then they answered and said to the king, True, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And they are in the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Okay. And the MacArthur notes, basically. So, of course, Nebuchadnezzar's mad that they're not bowing down, of course. Then he orders the furnace to be heated 7 times more than it was normally heated. 7 times more. So what is this talking about? So the king's fury at being defied to his face led to cry for an intensification of the heat. He was not literally requiring the fire to be 7 times hotter as a gauge would indicate, or requiring 7 times as long to heat, or 7 times the amount of fuel. So the king, the king in anger means intensely hot, using 7 figuratively, basically to denote completeness. Similar to 10 in Daniel 1:20. And of course, the phrase also, exceedingly hot or intensely hot. Yep. And a stone or a brick, a stone or a brick furnace with an air draft could be made hotter basically by more fuel and air. So maybe what he means is, since of course 7 is the number of completion, probably it's maybe make the furnace as hot as possible, like the maximum, basically. Yeah, yeah, not, literally 7 times higher on a gauge or as long, or the 7 times the amount of fuel. Basically, just make it as hot as it's possible. That's probably maybe what it is. Yeah, the highest. Yeah, or exceedingly hot, as it says. Yep. All right. Yep. And then they were taken up, basically. Yep. They were bound in their coats and trousers, and all the clothing they still had on. They were bound up. Yeah. And they were cast into the midst of the furnace. Yep. 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 And they were taken up and cast in. So what is that? Basically, it refers to being taken upward, maybe on some kind of ramp to near enough, basically near enough to the very top of the furnace to be thrown into it. And the fire basically ultimately was so hot, yeah, and the king's command was urgent, immediately, and immediate, and the fire was so hot, yeah, the flame basically killed those men that threw the 3 into the furnace. Yep. Yep. So, yeah. Well, did they get thrown in or did they fall in? Because it says in 23 they fell in. They fell down into the midst of the. Well, maybe what happened, I don't know. That maybe when they got thrown in from the top, maybe there was a shaft, as MacArthur says, that maybe directed them down into the furnace bottom on top of the fuel. Yeah, so maybe when they got thrown in, they just fell down a shaft. Yeah, right into it, basically, right into the center of it at the very bottom. So maybe that's what it was. Okay. But of course, they get thrown in, and then they notice a 4th guy in there. Yep. And then nobody is hurt, and they're not burning up at all. Yep. And that 4th guy looks like a son of God. Well, the Son of God, actually. And the king seemed to only know that the 4th person was a heavenly being. He called him a son of the gods, which is just a pagan reference to one who appeared supernatural. And then coming up, verse 28 mentions angel. Well, angel is capitalized. Angel of the Lord, right? Yep. And that angel of the Lord, could be ultimately the pre-incarnate Jesus. Yep. The 4th person, and here you go. The 4th person could possibly have been the 2nd person of the Godhead, Jesus Christ, the pre-incarnate appearance, like in Joshua 5 when he appeared to Joshua, for example. And I think probably that angel of the Lord character, probably could have been just a pre-incarnate Jesus, even in the Old Testament there too. Maybe not a literal angel. Yeah. Well, angel, of course, just means messenger. Yeah. So. Yeah. So. But anyway. All right. We'll see what Endearing Word has to say about this real quick. Yeah, real quick. And hopefully wrap it up pretty soon. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar, of course, was furious. And no matter how brave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, facing the fury of the king was still extremely intimidating. Yeah. And we get the feeling that prior to their statement that probably Nebuchadnezzar spoke kindly, almost in a fatherly manner, to these wayward boys. And he did give him one last chance to do it. So maybe initially he wasn't that upset, but then whenever they refused to, that's when he got upset. Yep, after hearing their bold challenge, yep, to the king's demands, then the expression on his face changed. Well, this is kind of a long quote from Spurgeon. So, alright, here's this. Here's the first part. Despite the intense intimidation, the men stayed courageous in their confession of the faith. Spurgeon eloquently described the horror of those who would lose courage at such times. Yeah. Remember also that by yielding to the fear of men, you are demeaning yourself. There shall come a day when the man that was ashamed of Christ will himself be ashamed. He will wonder where he can hide his guilty head. Look at him. There he is. The traitor who denied the Lord. The Christ was spat upon and nailed to the cross, and this man was afraid to own him, to win the smile of a silly maid, to escape the jest of a coarse fellow, to win a few pieces of silver, to stand respectable among his fellow men. He turned his back upon his Redeemer, and he sold his Lord. And now what could be said for him? Who can excuse him? The angels shun him as a man who was ashamed of the Lord of glory. He is clothed with shame and everlasting contempt. Even the lost in hell get away from him, for many of them were more honest than he. Is there such a man as this before me? I summon him in the name of the Lord, in the name of the living God, to answer for his cowardice. Let him come forth and own his crime and humbly seek forgiveness at the hands of the gracious Savior. Amen. Yeah. 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 And hopefully in doing so, then maybe, then maybe, you can stand. Yep. All right. And everything was done to make sure, basically, that the Hebrew men were quickly and completely burned. Yeah, bound in coat and their clothing and all that stuff. Yeah. All right. And then, of course, here's some more here. Yep. And then they get thrown in, of course. Those guys who threw them in get burned up. Yep. Nebuchadnezzar sees the four alive and well in the furnace, and he was astonished. Yep. And endearing word says, it's astonishing that anyone survived for a moment inside the furnace when others perished at the door. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, those guys at the door at the top, yeah, I mean, they didn't make it. Yeah, that threw them in. Yeah. But yet the ones who were in it did. That's interesting. In the Septuagint, of course, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the original, says in Daniel 3:24 that Nebuchadnezzar's attention was caught when he heard the men singing praises in the furnace. And we can imagine that the king had cast them into the furnace, and he didn't intend to look twice, believing that they would be immediately consumed. And as he walked away with a satisfied look on his face, he was immediately stopped by the sound of singing coming from the furnace. And at a safe distance from the raging heat, he peered inside, and he saw four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. And if this singing in the furnace is true, basically it reminds us of Paul and Silas singing in Acts 16 while they were in the Philippian jail. Yep. And Nebuchadnezzar says the fourth person is like the Son of God. So Nebuchadnezzar tells us who the fourth person was. The Son of God. Jesus was literally with them in the worst of their trial. Now, we don't know If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that the Son of God was with them in their trial, sometimes we're aware of Jesus' presence in our trials, sometimes we are not, but he is there nevertheless. And here's what Spurgeon says. Spurgeon observed that God's people are often in the furnace, and although there's different kinds of furnaces, they serve similar purposes to life, basically. 1, there's a furnace that man prepares. 2, there's a furnace that Satan prepares. And 3, there's a furnace that God prepares. And God can deliver us from a trial. He can miraculously sustain and strengthen us in a trial. And then here's that guy, John Trapp. He says this. He quotes an English martyr who said this as he was burnt at the stake. O ye papists, behold ye look for miracles, but here now you may see a miracle, for in this fire I feel no more pain than as if I were in a bed of down, but it is to me as a bed of roses. And Nebuchadnezzar observed that the 4 men were free in the fire. The fire only burnt the ropes that bound them. The ropes that bound them. Those were that was the only thing that was burnt. Alright. And then, of course, Rakshak and Benny. Basically, in Rakshak and Benny, well, here's this. Hey, boss, how many guys did we throw into the furnace? 3. Well, it looks like 4 guys are in there now, and one of them is real shiny. And another thing, boss, they ain't burning up. Rakshak, Benny, come out of there. And that's next. Alright, in the final section, Nebuchadnezzar praises God, 26 through 30. Alright, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, and come here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, king's counselors gathered together. They saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of the fire was not even on them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language who speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. There you go. And the final notes here. So the fire had no power, basically, on them. When God enacts a miracle, he supernaturally controls all the details so that his power is unmistakable and there's no other explanation. Make no mistake that he controlled the fire. And the king was convinced, and he was eager to add the God of these men to his, Penelope, panoply or whatever of deities. And soon he learned that God was not one God of many, but the only God. And he'll learn that in chapter 4, so stay tuned. Alright, well that's the end of the MacArthur notes, actually, so I'll wrap it up with endearing word here. Alright. So the Hebrew men leave the furnace unharmed, of course. And then Nebuchadnezzar, when he called them out, he called them servants of the Most High God. Yeah, before they were even out of the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar recognized that these men served the true God, the God Most High. Yep, fire had no power again. The trial had no power over these men because they were thoroughly submitted to the power and will of God. And before the time of Jesus, they knew Jesus' promise. And this is what Jesus said: "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." John 16:33. And that was even before Jesus went to the cross. Yep, there was no smell of fire on him either. Yep, now this demonstrates how complete their deliverance was. And this whole account illustrates perhaps serving as a type of the future of Israel during the Great Tribulation. Now again, not every Christian holds to the view, but anyway. So Nebuchadnezzar is like the Antichrist who forces the whole world into one religion of idolatry. Nebuchadnezzar's image is like the image described in Revelation 13 that the whole world will be commanded to worship. The fiery furnace is like the Great Tribulation, which will be great affliction for the Jews. And the three men are like Israel, who will be preserved through the tribulation. The executioners who perished are like those in league with the Antichrist, who Jesus will slay at his return. And the mysteriously absent Daniel is like the church, not even present for this time of great tribulation. Well, maybe that's one way of, maybe looking at it with this, with this story. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if that might be right way of interpreting, especially since not everybody holds to that view of the end times. But anyway, that's still pretty interesting, I gotta say. Yeah. But however it's going to go with the end times, I mean, there is persecution promised for Christians. So that's always been the case, but hopefully, if we are following Christ, we will stand as they did. And and we might get delivered or we may not. Well, even if you don't get delivered on earth, either way, you get delivered ultimately, because you're still going to be on earth to serve Christ, or you're going to go be with Christ. So either way, it's basically a win-win. So, well, maybe much more of a win ultimately if you actually go to be with the Lord. So therefore, you shouldn't be afraid of it. So yeah. All right, and then Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the greatness of the God of the true God of the three Hebrews. Yeah, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Nebuchadnezzar gave glory to God, but he recognized that this great God is not his God. He was still the God of these three brave men. So, he didn't acknowledge God as the one and only God. Who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him. Yep. And then, of course, Nebuchadnezzar in verse 15 of this very chapter, he asked the question, who is the God, lowercase, who will deliver you from my hands? Now Nebuchadnezzar knew a great deal about this God, the only God, capital G. Yep, he is the God of the Hebrews, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's the God who sends a Savior, sent his angel, or pre-incarnate Christ, if you will. He is the God of great power, and delivered his servants. He is the God worthy of trust, who trusted in him. He is the God worthy of full surrender, frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies. And he is the God who demands exclusive allegiance. They should not worship and serve any other God except their own God. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar knew a lot about God, but he he still did not know him personally yet. Yep, stay tuned. Okay, here's another note about yielding their bodies. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego surrendered their bodies completely to God, body, soul, spirit. It was the kind of submission that Paul wrote about in Romans 12:1. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And this whole account is a powerful illustration of the principle of Romans 12:1. And we see Satan trying to make the believer bow down to his idealized image of what men and women should be. Christians must resist this with everything they have and pursue God's ideal. And in this we fulfill Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. Alright, final note here. So Nebuchadnezzar makes a proclamation that nothing evil should be said against the God of the Hebrews. He made the decree that that would be the case. So the three Hebrew men, they did not ask for Nebuchadnezzar to make this decree, and they probably did not want him to. Coerced worship is not good, either towards idols or even towards the one true God. You can't make somebody worship the one true God. Yeah, you can't force somebody to become a Christian. And of course, having, Christendom, mixing, church and state and punishing non-believers or whatever, yeah, that's never a good idea. And ultimately, really real believers get punished, because ultimately heresy basically ends up, going alongside, politics usually. False religion with state usually. And the real Christians get persecuted. Yeah, Catholic Church persecuted true Christians. Yeah. So, yeah, it's not just Muslims or atheists. Yeah, so anything, yeah. Anyway, now there's no other God who can deliver like this. Yep. Seeing God at work in the life of his people was an extremely effective testimony to Nebuchadnezzar. Yep. And Paul expressed the same idea in 2 Corinthians 3, verses 2 through 3. You are our epistle written in our hearts, known and read by all men. Clearly you are an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh, that is, of the heart. And there you go. And that's the end of chapter 3. And of course, they didn't sing a song about standing up for God afterwards, like they did in Rack, Shack, and Benny. Yeah, but anyway. Yeah, but they could have been singing in the furnace, but anyway. Alright, well, here's a few sources, I guess, that were used in that chapter. So, John, Trapp, John, Commentary on the Old and New Testaments, Volume 3, Proverbs to Daniel, and then, the place of publishing, Eureka, California, and then Tansky Publications, 1997. Alright, and then there's and then Spurgeon, Spurgeon, Charles Haddon, the new Park Street Pulpit, volumes 1 through 6, and the Metropolitan Tabernacle Pulpit, volumes 7 through 63, and then Pasadena, Texas, Pilgrim Publications, 1990. Okay, so, alright, and then, I think there was there it is. And then there was a mention earlier from the guy, Baldwin, J. Joyce G. Daniel, Introduction and Commentary, Downers Grove, Illinois, InterVarsity Press, 1978. Okay. And I think those were all the ones used in this chapter. Alright. So, just want to make that clear, because I don't want to be, guilty of plagiarism. Alright, so Lord willing, I'll get to chapter 4 next time. But until then, may God bless you in the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen and amen.